Picture a retired shipwright sitting on a stone step in the port town of Ostia, sometime in the 2nd century. His knuckles are swollen. He can't hear as well as he used to. But that evening, in a letter to his nephew, he writes something strange. He thanks his body for everything it has already given him, and he means it. We don't know his name, but we know men like him existed all over the Roman world, because the philosophers who taught them left behind exactly the instructions they followed. Today we're going to walk through 7 of those instructions. Habits the Stoics used to face old age not with dread, but with something closer to curiosity. And we'll follow one modern woman's path through all 7, because ideas only really prove themselves when someone actually lives inside them. Stick around, because the last habit reframes everything that comes before it. If you're new here, this is Wisdom of the Stoics. Ancient thinking applied to modern life. If that's useful to you, subscribing helps more people find it. Let's get into it. Most of us inherited a story about growing older that we never actually chose. It goes something like this: you're capable, then one day you're not. Decline arrives like a thief, and the best you can do is brace for the loss. The Stoics rejected that story almost entirely, not because they were in denial about the body. Several of them wrote candidly about chronic pain, injury, and failing health, but because they made a sharp distinction modern culture tends to blur: the difference between what time does to you and what you do with the time you're given. We'll call our modern example Renata, 71, a retired nurse. Her story isn't dramatic, which is exactly the point. These habits were built for ordinary days, not extraordinary ones. Renata spent her first 2 years of retirement moving less, not more. It felt earned. Then a minor fall in her garage. Nothing broken, just badly bruised. Scared her enough that she finally read the book her son had been pushing on her, a translation of a Roman emperor's private notebook, written to himself, never meant for publication. One line stopped her: the idea that a person owes their body the same discipline they'd give any post they'd been assigned to guard. Not pampered, not ignored, but maintained on purpose. That emperor ruled during a plague, fought on frontier campaigns into his 50s, and dealt with a stomach ailment that never fully left him. He didn't get to treat his body as background noise. It was the only tool he had for doing anything else in his life. This is the opposite of what we're usually told about aging gracefully: that the wise move is to slow down and expect less. The Stoics thought physical effort was closer to a moral obligation than a lifestyle choice. One philosopher who taught with a permanently injured leg, the result of mistreatment during his years enslaved, never used it as a reason to stop pushing his body toward whatever it could still do. Renata started walking daily. Slowly at first, around the block, then further. Within a year she'd added light resistance bands twice a week, over her doctor's mild skepticism, which later turned into enthusiasm once her bone scans improved. Here's the science that would have delighted these philosophers. Research on strength training in people in their 90s has repeatedly shown measurable gains in muscle mass within a matter of weeks. The body doesn't stop answering discipline just because a lot of birthdays have gone by. But what Renata noticed mattered more than the numbers. She said it gave her back a sense of authorship over her own days. She wasn't watching decline happen to her. She was in the conversation. What's one small physical habit you've been postponing? Tell us below. This is the kind of thing this community actually reads. Aging brings a specific kind of grief, not just physical loss, but the slow erosion of a world you recognized. Renata's sharpest experience of this wasn't the fall. It was 3 years later, when her husband of decades died suddenly, mid-afternoon. doing something completely unremarkable. She described the weeks afterward as losing the floor beneath her. It was in that grief that she came across the teaching that would end up organizing the rest of her life, the idea, taught by a former slave-turned-philosopher, that everything belongs to one of two categories. Things inside your power, your judgments, your effort, your choices, and things outside it, other people, your lifespan, the timing of lost. Nearly all human misery, he argued, comes from mixing the two up. This didn't erase Renata's grief. The Stoics never claimed it would, and they wept openly at their own losses. What it gave her was somewhere to put her energy that wasn't a losing fight. She couldn't undo the timing of her husband's death. She could decide whether to isolate or reach out. She could decide whether grief hardened into bitterness or softened into gratitude for having had something worth losing. This is where Stoic aging diverges sharply from a lot of modern, anti-aging thinking, which is often just an exhausting attempt to control the uncontrollable. Every metric, every wrinkle, as if life were an engineering problem. The Stoics would call that a fight against weather. You can't out-argue a storm. You can build a better roof. Renata began asking herself one question most mornings. What today is mine to work on, and what today do I need to set down? If something in your life is costing you enormous energy despite being completely outside your control, what would it look like to set it down this week? Let us know in the comments. One philosopher, emperor, kept returning, in his private writing, to a mental exercise imagining himself rising above the city, above the empire, until individual worries, status, appearance, even mortality, shrank down to their true scale against the size of everything. Renata found her own version by accident. On her grandson's suggestion, she started sitting outside most evenings just to watch the sky change. It felt a little silly at first. Over weeks, it stopped feeling silly. Her fears about her own mortality, which had followed her since her husband's death, began loosening their grip, not disappearing, just losing their monopoly on her attention. There's real research behind this. Psychologists call it self-distancing, deliberately stepping back from an experience to view it from a wider frame. Older adults who practice this regularly report meaningfully lower anxiety and higher life satisfaction, independent of their actual physical health. One Stoic writer put it simply, we suffer more from our imagination of the future than from the present itself. The zoomed-out view interrupts that imagined future and returns you to the only place life actually happens. Right now. Try it tonight. 2 minutes outside looking up. Tell us what shifted even slightly. There's a specific cruelty a lot of people direct only at themselves as they age. A running commentary they'd never say out loud to anyone else. You're slower now. You're becoming a burden. Renata caught herself doing exactly this in front of a mirror more than once, cataloging everything she thought had gone wrong with her reflection. The emperor's private notebook has an answer for this too. He wrote about refusing to waste time on cruel thoughts about other people, and even less time on cruel thoughts about himself. This isn't just a nice sentiment. Long-running studies on older adults have found that people who hold more positive views of their own aging live measurably longer. Some studies show a gap of several years, independent of diet or exercise. The internal monologue itself appears to matter biologically. One writer warned specifically about borrowed opinions, absorbing a culture's fear of aging as though it were your own considered conclusion, rather than something you actually examined. Renata built a small habit. Whenever the critical voice rose, she'd ask, would I say this to someone I loved? The answer was always no. So, slowly, she extended herself the same basic respect. What does your inner voice actually say about your own aging? Naming it honestly is usually the first move that changes it. One popular modern myth: the whole point of a working life is to eventually stop. Retire, relax, let the remaining years pass quietly. One Stoic essay on the shortness of life pushes back on this hard, describing people who spend decades anticipating retirement, only to discover, once they arrive there, that they don't know what to do with themselves. Unstructured time without purpose tends to curdle. Renata spent decades nursing before retiring. The purposelessness crept up on her quietly and embarrassed her to admit. Her days had gone from tightly structured to loosely filled, but not full. The Stoics believed humans are built for contribution the way a bee is built to make honey. It's not a burden imposed from outside. It's closer to the nature of the thing. This doesn't mean grinding away at a career forever. It means keeping some form of daily engagement that gives you a reason to show up. Renata found hers almost by accident, volunteering 2 mornings a week at a community clinic, helping younger nurses the way she once needed help herself. She said those 2 mornings became the anchor the rest of her week organized itself around. Research backs this up broadly. Older adults who maintain some regular purposeful activity, paid or not, consistently show lower rates of cognitive decline and depression, and in several studies, lower mortality, regardless of the specific form the activity takes. If you've found your own version of daily work later in life, tell us what it is. Someone reading the comments probably needs the idea. This one sounds grim on first hearing. The Stoics called it premeditatio malorum, deliberately, calmly imagining hardship in advance, so it doesn't catch you unprepared. One letter. Writer put it directly: nothing should be unexpected by us. We should send our minds ahead to meet difficulty before it arrives. This isn't anxious spiraling. Modern psychology has a cousin concept, anticipatory coping, which, done deliberately and calmly, reduces anxiety rather than feeding it. The difference is intention. Anxious worry loops without resolution. Stoic rehearsal walks through something once, on purpose, and then sets it down. Renata's encounter with this came through a close friend's difficult diagnosis. Guided severed again by her grandson, she sat with the imagined loss deliberately for about 15 minutes, not rushing past it, really feeling it. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped being a shapeless dread lurking at the edge of every good day. It became a known thing. More than that. Rehearsing the loss sharpened her presence with her friend in the meantime. She found herself less distracted by small irritations and more attentive to the ordinary mornings they still had. If there's something hard you've been avoiding, thinking about entirely, 15 honest minutes with it might change your relationship to it more than years of avoidance would. This is the one that reframes the other 6. The emperor wrote that we should live as though we might leave at any moment, and, more importantly, treat the present not as a fragment of some longer unfinished project, but as a complete life in its own right, one that could stand entirely on its own. Most of us, especially as we get older, quietly treat today as a stepping stone toward some future completion. That creates a low hum of dissatisfaction, because if today only matters as preparation for tomorrow, today is never quite enough. That tension gets sharper as the number of remaining tomorrows visibly shrinks. The Stoic alternative. What if today doesn't need to lead anywhere to be complete? What if the goal was never a finish line, just a fully lived day, over and over? Under that frame, aging stops being a race against a receding target. You're just living today, completely. Tomorrow will be its own complete day when it arrives. Renata arrived at this slowly. Through the walking, the volunteering, the evenings under the sky. But it crystallized for her on an ordinary afternoon 4 years after her husband's death. She'd walked her usual distance, spent her usual morning at the clinic, had lunch with her friend, whose diagnosis had, against odds, stabilized, and sat in her garden watching the light change. She realized she wasn't waiting for anything, not counting down towards some future she needed to survive to reach, not mourning a past she couldn't return to, just completely living that particular day. And it was enough. This is why the 7th habit isn't just another item on the list. It recontextualizes all 6. The walking isn't preparation for some future healthy old age. It's today's complete expression of respect for the body you have right now. The letting go of what you can't control isn't a strategy for eventual peace. It's today's peace, available immediately. The daily work isn't a bridge to some future purpose. It's today's purpose, whole on its own. Under this view, aging isn't decline toward an ending. It's the accumulation of complete days, each one whole, each one sufficient. Back to that shipwright on his step in Ostia, or the emperor on his own version of that bench, hands trembling, writing to himself about a body that was failing piece by piece. They didn't have strength, training studies, or longitudinal psychology data. They had careful attention to their own lives and the accumulated thinking of everyone before them. And what they left behind still holds up. 7 habits train the body on purpose. Sort what's yours from what isn't. Zoom out when the moment gets too loud. Talk to yourself like someone worth respecting. Keep work that's actually yours. Rehearse hard things before they arrive, out of love rather than fear. And treat today, this one ordinary as it might be, as a complete life, not a fragment of a longer one. Renata is 74 now. Her hands still show the years. She still grieves her husband quietly on certain afternoons. But she told her grandson recently that she used to think growing old meant slowly disappearing. And she doesn't think that anymore. Now it feels more like arriving, a little more completely each year, at who she was always capable of being. If any of this landed, 3 quick things. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of thinking week to week. Tell us in the comments which habit you most need to start with. And if there's someone in your life quietly afraid of getting older, send them this. Not because they need fixing, but because they deserve to hear that the years ahead are a craft, not a countdown. Thanks for spending this time with us. Wisdom of the Stoics.